the gentleman from Texas rise?
Mr. Speaker, by the direction of the Committee on the Rules, I call up House Resolution 339 and ask for its immediate consideration.
The clerk will report the resolution.
House Calendar Number 51, House Resolution 339. Resolved, that upon adoption of this resolution, it shall be in order to consider in the House the bill H.R. 2775 to condition the provision of premium and cost-sharing subsidies under the Patient Protection and Affordable Care Act upon a certification that a program to verify household income and other qualifications for such subsidies is operational and for other purposes. All points of order against consideration of the bill are waived. The amendment printed in the report of the Committee on Rules accompanying this resolution shall be considered as adopted. The bill as amended shall be considered as read. All points of order against provisions in the bill as amended are waived. The previous question shall be considered as ordered on the bill as amended and on any amendment thereto to final passage without intervening motion except one 1 hour of debate with 40 minutes equally divided and controlled by the Chair and Ranking Minority Member of the Committee on Energy and Commerce, and 20 minutes equally divided and controlled by the Chair and Ranking Minority Member of the Committee on Ways and Means, and 2, 1 motion to recommit with or without instructions.
The gentleman from Texas is recognized for 1 hour.
Mr. Speaker, for the purposes of debate only, I yield customary 30 minutes to the gentleman from Colorado, Mr. Polis, pending which I yield myself such time as I may consume. During consideration of the resolution, all time yielded for the purpose of debate only.
Without objection.
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent that all members have 5 legislative days to revise and extend their remarks.
Without objection.
Mr. Speaker, House Resolution 339 provides for consideration of House Resolution 2775, the No Subsidies Without Verification Act of 2013. This is a critical bill as the Obama administration begins to implement and sign up people for the insurance exchanges in literally less than 3 weeks' time. I'm a member of the Energy and Commerce Committee, and Mr. Speaker, I can tell you that the Secretary of Health and Human Services appears ill-prepared to verify that people qualifying for the numerous government handouts and subsidies included in the Affordable Care Act actually meet the income requirements for those subsidies. Because fraud and abuse have been rampant in just about every program that is administered by the Department of Health and Human Services, including Medicare and Medicaid, a certified verification system being in place prior to the implementation of the Affordable Care Act is critical. This bill addresses this extreme deficiency in the inappropriately named Affordable Care Act. The rule before us today provides for 1 hour of debate, equally divided between the majority and the minority. Further, the rule makes a correction to the underlying bill, clarifying that the Inspector General for Health and Human Services, rather than the Secretary, which is a partisan position, the Inspector General is better equipped to oversee the verification process for the eligibility of subsidies. Finally, the minority is afforded the customary motion to recommit, allowing for yet another opportunity to amend the legislation. H.R. 2775, the No Subsidies Without Verification Act, introduced by Ms. Black from Tennessee, is an important piece of legislation to protect taxpayer dollars from inappropriate expenditure. Less than 3 weeks until enrollment in the health exchanges, and they go live, and the Obama administration continues to tinker and twist the dials on the Affordable Care Act, exposing the executive branch's lack of readiness for such a massive and fundamental change of the way health care is delivered and administered in this country. In an effort to save their misguided health care takeover, the administration has significantly scaled back the original scope of the Affordable Care Act, cutting corners, delaying any piece of the legislation which becomes inconvenient or perhaps embarrassing to the President. The President has chosen to delay the employer mandate, including in the Affordable Care Act, yet not give that same reprieve to everyday Americans. Why? Why should that be? Because enforcing the employer mandate was inconvenient. The President announced that he could not implement the Class Act portion of the Affordable Care Act. Why? Because it was inconvenient. Now the President simply will not enforce the verification requirements to prevent fraudulent acceptance of subsidies. Why? Because, again, it is inconvenient. Just 3 months before the exchanges are supposed to go live on January 1st, the Health and Human Services decided that on July 5th of this year that it would simply accept an applicant's attestation of household income without any certifiable verification. The President's strategy on the health care law is now trust, don't verify. The Secretary of Health and Human Services made the opening of the exchanges on October 1st her central priority. However, facing tight deadlines, daunting workloads, the administration has instead drastically lowered their standards. It's clear from the final rule, issued late in the day on July 5th, 2013, that the administration will allow any type of flexibility necessary to ensure that their law appears that it is being implemented as planned. But regardless of what you may believe, the administration has been very clear. Their rule states explicitly, and quoting here, the exchange may accept the attestation of projected annual household income without further verification for the purposes of the exchange's eligibility determination, close quote. The administration is more than comfortable with letting over $1 trillion go out the door without verifying it's going to the correct individuals. They even state in the final rule, again quoting, it is an ideal approach to provide flexibility in the case of many verifications. Close quote. Since it's apparently too much work to verify everyone's income, the administration has determined that it's okay with spending over $1 trillion just based on what individuals think they may make in the next year. Instead of admitting that they won't be ready on time, the administration decided that it will just spend the money anyway. While the constant delaying and changing of the law is worrisome, what should concern all of us the most is that what this new change in regulation will do. By eliminating the verification requirement, the only way the government will determine who gets federal subsidies now is by whoever claims that they themselves need the subsidies. Quite frankly, with premiums rising at the rate they are across the country and set to rise even more for calendar year 2015, it seems like everyone will be telling the Department of Health and Human Services that they need subsidies because, quite frankly, no one will be able to afford the President's health insurance. Maybe then it will be good that no one in the administration is checking to see who might be lying about their household income. While the constant delaying and changing of the law is worrisome, another concern is that what this new change in regulation will do. By eliminating the verification requirement, the only way the government will determine who gets federal subsidies now is by who says they will need them. This will open the exchanges to a staggering amount of potential fraud. It's also blatantly political. By doing this, the Obama administration has made it clear that they want as many people to sign up for the exchanges as possible, no matter their eligibility status. Taxpayers, unfortunately, will be charged with over $1 trillion over the next decade to pay for the exchange subsidies. With over $1 trillion going out the door, shouldn't the American people have the assurance that the government is sending the money to the people who actually need it? All of this is so the President can reap the public relations benefit of talking about the popularity of exchanges and salvage his failed signature policy initiative. I encourage my colleagues to vote yes on the rule and yes on the underlying bill. Stand up to this health insurance subsidy fraud. With that, I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman from Texas reserves. The gentleman from Colorado is recognized.
I thank the gentleman for yielding me the customary 30 minutes. I yield myself such time as I may consume.
Without objection.
Mr. Speaker, I rise in opposition to the rule and the underlying bill. This bill is redundant and it's a waste of time. The Department of Health and Human Services already has a plan in place to review individual information submitted to health care exchanges and to ensure that no one is able to get health insurance tax credits that they aren't eligible for. So instead of considering these redundant bills, let me talk about what we're not considering here today, which would actually solve a problem that the American people are demanding that this institution address. The time to pass comprehensive immigration reform is now. We can do it now. Instead of debating something that's redundant here today, there's a bill that has received more than 2/3 support in the United States Senate. And if this body can act on it and send it to President Obama's desk, finally we'll be able to do something to create jobs and increase our competitiveness in the global economy, lower our deficit, ensure our security, and reflect our values as Americans and prevent the undermining of the rule of law that occurs every day. That we have over 10 million people in this country that are undocumented and lack documentation, violating our laws. This institution can fix that now. The Senate has acted, let the House act. As economists across the political spectrum have found, the economic benefits of immigration reform are tremendous. According to the nonpartisan Congressional Budget Office and the Joint Committee on Taxation, if we act now to pass the Senate Comprehensive Immigration Reform Bill, we would reduce the deficit by over $135 billion. And in the following decade, over $600 billion. Why aren't we spending our time discussing that and passing that here on the floor of the House today? Further, the Senate bill is estimated to boost the output of the U.S. economy by 3.3%, a 3.3% increase to GDP, and a reduction in the deficit. That's $700 billion in an additional gross domestic product by 2023. As a June Wall Street Journal article citing Stephen Goss, Social Security's chief actuary, pointed out, the future fiscal immigration windfall is likely to exceed $4 trillion. We can shore up Social Security and protect our seniors, prevent any cuts to Social Security by passing immigration reform now. That's what the country wants us to do. How does it shore up Social Security? Because immigration occurs at a young age. Immigration reform ensures that there are people paying into Social Security, young, healthy workers, and particularly as baby boomers retire, immigrants, and we're talking about people that are already here, let's make sure they pay their taxes. By not taking this bill up, we're preventing people from paying into Social Security like they should, and paying their taxes like they should. They live in this country, they should pay taxes. According to the Wall Street Journal, immigration reform will result in an extra $600 billion into the Social Security Trust Fund and over $4 trillion over 75 years. Another urgent reason that this body should be taking up immigration reform instead of redundant measures around health care reform is our national security. We currently have a porous border, and while progress has been made, in fact, in 2011, the number of illegal border crossings was the lowest since 1972, it was still 327,000. 327,000 people illegally crossed our border. What does that say about our security as our country, our ability to enforce our immigration laws, when over 300,000 people have illegally crossed the border? Well, there's a solution. It's ready to pass. Let's talk about it, not redundant bills that don't do anything and aren't going anywhere. The Senate Comprehensive Immigration Bill, while of course not perfect, includes unprecedented border and interior enforcement measures. The bill includes increasing the number of full-time Border Patrol agents from 21,000 to 38,405, mandating an electronic exit system at all ports where Customs and Border Protections agents are deployed, constructing at least 350 additional miles of fencing, bringing the miles of high-tech border fencing to 700, constructing additional border control stations and operating bases, mandating 24-hour surveillance of the border region using mobile, video, portable systems, as well as unmanned aircraft, and deploying 1,000 distress beacon stations in areas where migrant deaths occur. Look, it takes getting serious to secure the border. And this costs money, and we can do it in the context of reducing the deficit by over $100 billion, such as the windfall from immigration reform that we effectively get to secure our southern border for free and reduce the deficit by $100 billion and improve the Social Security Trust Fund to the tune of $4 trillion, giving American seniors the security that they need in their retirement. That's what we can do by bringing the Senate Immigration Reform Bill to the floor of the House right now. The Senate Immigration Reform Bill also increases American competitiveness. Immigration is the economic engine that's grown our economy for generations. Unfortunately, under our current immigration system, it's not designed to foster job creation. All too often, it undermines American workers, takes jobs away from American workers, leads companies to offshore jobs, to outsource jobs overseas. I represent a district that has two excellent universities, Colorado State University, University of Colorado at Boulder, great graduate programs in math, engineering, the sciences, and we graduate Students with advanced degrees from countries all over the world, from India, from Mexico, from China, that have the skills that we need to keep America competitive and create jobs. And yet, the day after they graduate, without any access to a green card, many of these talented young PhDs and master's degree students have to return to their home country, and guess what? The jobs follow them back home. In the information economy, the employers don't care whether they're here or there, as long as they contribute the bits and bytes. We want those jobs here in America. We want that income here in America. The bipartisan Senate bill addresses that as well. Another component that we have for job creation in America is a startup visa. This is a way that entrepreneurs with ideas can come to America to start their companies here and employ Americans. For goodness sakes, do we want the great companies of tomorrow employing thousands or tens of thousands of people to be overseas just because we don't let the founders come here to start their companies? That's common sense. Creates jobs for Americans. Let's do it. We also have improvements to the EB-5 program to facilitate foreign investment and raising capital for American companies to grow jobs here in America. This body should take up the comprehensive immigration reform bill now. Not tomorrow, not in 5 minutes, now. Let's do it. So that we can finally move forward on creating jobs, improving border security, and reducing our deficit and shoring up Social Security. Another reason that we urgently need to bring up immigration reform now is because the current system is simply out of sync with our values as Americans. Our faith values as Jews, Christians, Muslims, every other faith in our country, as well as our American values, our values of our founding fathers. Faith leaders from across the spectrum have been among the most vocal supporters of the Senate Comprehensive Immigration Bill. Over the August recess, the Evangelical Immigration Roundtable, a coalition of faith groups, continued the drumbeat for a vote on the Senate bill and called for an end to the quote-unquote cruelty perpetuated by the current immigration deportation system. It's completely arbitrary. Young American children, American citizens, kids 8, 10, 12 years old, in my state and across the country, to our great shame, come home from school to find that their parents are in detention, their parents are not there, their parents are facing deportation proceedings. Why? Perhaps a tail light was out on their car. And to a cost of taxpayers of tens of thousands of dollars, they now wait in line for a costly deportation while their American child returns to a home with no parent. How does that reflect our values as Americans? The solution? Pass the Senate Comprehensive Immigration Reform Bill now. The Senate Comprehensive Immigration Reform Bill will halt more than 400,000 costly deportations, each one costing taxpayers tens of thousands of dollars, tearing families apart. The bill removes the limitations on the number of visas that legal permanent residents can request for their minor children, for their spouses, ensuring that families aren't separated for years, for generations, while awaiting legal status. It creates a process to clear the estimated 4.4 million person backlog in the family and employment-based visa system within a decade. Replaces our broken immigration system with one that works, one that reflects our values, and one that respects the rule of law in this country. The Senate-passed bill would help people like Gabriella, a 20-year-old woman in Colorado, undocumented, recently graduated from high school. Gabriella and her younger sister were brought to the U.S. as young children by their mother. They didn't have a say in the matter. They were brought here. Now their mother was deported several years ago, leaving her 2 children behind. Gabriella is now homeless, but has nevertheless taken on the responsibility of caring for her younger sister. The Senate bipartisan bill would ensure that families like Gabriella's won't be torn apart. That's not American. That doesn't reflect our values as a country, as a people. The Senate bill would also assist the young, courageous dreamers, individuals who were brought to this country as children, completed high school, some college, even military service, grew up in this country, know no other country, and have no pathway to legal status. Young people like Javier in my district that I represent, graduated in Summit County High School. He was the president of the student body. Javier grew up in this country, was brought here when he was young, doesn't have documentation. Javier is an Eagle Scout. Javier is the first in his family to get into a good college, a four-year university. But his lack of status has made it difficult not only to pursue his dreams of a higher education, but to figure out how he can live his life in a way that contributes to his country, the United States of America. If only we allow him to fully contribute, he will. Young dreamers across this country will contribute great things to our nation and make us proud if only we let them. It's time to stop talking about these redundant, senseless bills and bring up comprehensive immigration reform now. It's a big part of the solution to our fiscal problems, reducing the deficit, shoring up Social Security, finally getting serious about enforcing our border and enforcing employment verification to prevent companies from hiring people illegally. It improves American competitiveness, creates jobs, ensures that the great companies of tomorrow will be here in this country instead of overseas. That the people we need to make our economy grow, create jobs for Americans, are here and doing it legally. And to respect the rule of law in this country, rather than undermine the rule of law every day, as our current travesty and broken immigration system does. And finally, we know, Mr. Speaker, that as a people we are better than this. We need an immigration system that reflects our values, our faith values, our American values, our founding principles as a nation of immigrants and a nation of laws. Mr. Speaker, today's debate is really not about the Affordable Care Act or even health care in general. It's politics, it's redundant. I'd ask my friends on the other side of the aisle, why are we not focused on fixing our broken immigration system when we have a bipartisan bill that 2/3 of the Senate has supported, that 75% of the American people support, that the President has expressed a willingness to sign? Let's bring that bill up, debate that bill, pass that bill, and solve a problem that the American people are crying out for a solution for. I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman from Colorado reserves the balance. Gentleman from Texas recognized.
I thank the Speaker for the recognition. You know, the Senate passed bill, my understanding from recent discussion with House parliamentarian, has not arrived in the House. The reason it has not arrived in the House is because it has an origination problem. Now, the Senate, in its haste to rush a bill through, didn't get it right. So as a consequence, that bill cannot come up in the House. But we're here today to debate the rule for H.R. 2775. Now, one of the things that I do feel obligated to point out, whether it's comprehensive immigration reform, whether it's any of the other things that people talk about, if you have an executive branch that only selectively enforces parts of laws that it wants to, why wouldn't the American people fear what might come out of the selective enforcement of a comprehensive immigration law? Let me quote to you from the Patient Protection Affordable Care Act, signed into law by President Obama on March the 21st of 2010. Section 1513, Section D. This is a section that deals with the employer mandate. Section D, effective date. The amendments made by this section shall apply to months beginning after December 31st, 2013. That doesn't sound ambiguous. That doesn't sound difficult to comprehend. And yet we are told that selectively the President has decided he doesn't want to enforce this. It is inconvenient for him to enforce this. It runs counter to what some of his friends and some of the largest corporations in this country are telling him that they want. Not what the American people want, but what they want. And the president simply suspends this part of the law, suspends it in a blog post on July 2nd of this year. So this is a fear that people have in my district. How do we trust that this president is going to enforce the laws that under the Constitution he is told that he must enforce? How do we trust the Attorney General, who has sort of selectively decided what laws suit his purpose and what laws don't, and selectively enforces those laws? Look, why we are here today is because of the administration's selective enforcement of their law. I wasn't in favor of the Patient Protection Affordable Care Act. I voted against it. I voted against it in committee. I voted against it in the House version. I voted against it after it came back from the Senate. I'll vote against it every chance I get. But the fact of the matter is, the president signed into the law and then decided it's inconvenient. So when the effective date reads, the amendments made by this section shall apply to months beginning after December 31st, 2013, the president decides that's inconvenient. And he doesn't want to do that anymore. So he just suspends it. Even though the law is the law, we never took a vote on that. We never said, Mr. President, we're with you or against you on this. He simply decided. That's not the way this country is to run. That's not our constitutional republic that our founders envisioned for us. This is unilateral government by a ruler, which by definition is not allowed under our Constitution. I urge my colleagues to vote in favor of the rule. I urge my colleagues to vote in favor of the underlying bill, and I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman from Texas is reserved. Gentleman from Colorado is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, are we serious about border security? Is the border going to secure itself? 300,000 illegal crossings last year. That's almost 1,000 a day. That's 1,000 tomorrow. Congress is sitting around discussing this stuff. That's 1,000 the next day. That's 1,000 the next day. Every day, 1,000 people illegally entering this country. Who knows who they are? Who knows if they represent a security risk? Well, there's a solution. Let's get serious. Let's increase the number of Border Patrol agents. Let's implement high-tech measures at the border. It's not rocket science. In fact, guess what? Our friends in the Senate have figured it out. They passed an immigration reform bill that includes provisions that get serious about enforcing our southern border, that will substantially reduce, if not eliminate, illegal crossings. And it won't happen by itself. We have to pass it. We have to bring up that bill and pass it rather than redundant measures that don't do anything. Mr. Speaker, the coalition of evangelicals have put together an excellent statement of principles on immigration reform. The evangelical Christian leaders have called for a bipartisan solution that respects the God-given dignity of every person, protects the unity of the immediate family, and respects the rule of law. Mr. Speaker, I'd like to submit this policy statement to the record. And it's not only people of faith, it's every American who, as we stare in the mirror at night, vast majority of whom know that our grandparents, our great-grandparents, perhaps great-great-great-grandparents going to the Mayflower, somewhere along the line, Mr. Speaker, our predecessors, our parents and our grandparents came to these shores seeking opportunity, hope, and freedom, just as so many immigrants do today. And we can create a pathway to citizenship for people that are already here, who already contribute to our country, to ensure that they do so legally instead of extra-legally. Of course, getting behind those who are already in line through our current legal system. There's no citizenship that becomes anybody's right through this Senate immigration reform bill. It simply creates a line behind those who are already in line, but a light at the end of the tunnel to show that someday those who aspire to give back to this country, to make this country wealthier and more prosperous, those who aspire to pay taxes, those who aspire to contribute to Social Security, those who aspire to live within the rule of law, are able to do so someday. That families are reunited now, not in 10 years, not in 20 years. We don't have to ever again tell a young girl coming home from school, sorry, your parents have been removed over a taillight, or because they were in the wrong place at the wrong time, or their workplace was raided because of an unscrupulous employer. We can and we must do better. The urgency is now. Not only are families torn apart every day, not only are there close to 1,000 people a day crossing that border illegally, which will continue until we act, but we're costing Americans jobs and opportunities every day as well. Entrepreneurs and founders and folks that are looking at where to start their next great company that will employ thousands or tens of thousands of people are turning away from our shores. We're turning them away from our shores. Mr. Speaker, I call upon my colleagues to take up comprehensive immigration reform and pass the Senate bill now. I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman from Colorado reserves. The gentleman from Texas is recognized.
I thank the Speaker for the recognition. Let me just remind my colleagues here on the floor of the House that we are considering House Resolution 339 that provides for consideration of H.R. 2775, the No Subsidies Without Verification Act of 2013. And despite all of the tactics to distract from that debate, that is what the debate centers on today. I would like to point out to my colleagues an opinion piece in the Wall Street Journal from today called Stopping Obamacare Fraud. I'm going to read a little bit of the opinion piece. Every politician claims to hate fraud in government, and the House of Representatives will have a chance to prove it Wednesday when it votes to close a gigantic hole for potential abuse in the Affordable Care Act. The Health and Human Services Department announced in July that it won't verify individual eligibility for the tens of billions in insurance subsidies that the law will dole out. Americans are supposed to receive those subsidies based on income and only if their employer doesn't provide federally approved health benefits. But until 2015, the rule will be, come on in, the subsidy is fine. Continuing to quote from the Wall Street Journal, Health and Human Services will let its applicants self-attest that they are here and that they are legally eligible. No further questions asked. The new Obamacare exchanges will also be taking the applicant's word on their projected household income. It seems that what it calls operational barriers to continue to prevent Health and Human Services from checking applications against Internal Revenue Service income data. The administration argues that the fear of later HHS audits will keep applicants honest, though the threat of such checks has hardly prevented other fraud. The Treasury Inspector General estimates that 21 to 25% of earned income tax credits go to people who in fact are not eligible. An equivalent rate of fraud in the Affordable Care Act could mean $250 billion in bad payments in a decade. And does Health and Human Services really plan to claw back overpayments from individual exchange participants? Continuing to quote from the Wall Street Journal, House Republicans, by contrast, will offer a vote that matters on Tennessee Representative Diane Black's bill to require the administration to have a verification system in place before it hands out subsidies. Democrats have been unusually quiet in their opposition, perhaps because it is hard to justify voting, in effect, to give Americans subsidies to which they have no legal entitlement. Savings for taxpayers aside, the political merit of the House bill is that it puts a spotlight on a major Obamacare failure and makes Democrats vote either to fix it or to simply go along with the failure. It also highlights another case in which the Obama administration is refusing to enforce black-letter law. Republicans are asking that a vast new entitlement be held to the most basic due diligence or be prudently delayed until it can. If Democrats can't support that vote, voters should know. Close quote. again, from today's Wall Street Journal Review and Outlook. Mr. Speaker, it's pretty apparent that the administration is only enforcing those parts of the law that it finds in its own best interest, and if something is inconvenient or embarrassing, it suspends the enforcement. I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman from Texas reserves. The gentleman from Colorado is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, my colleague says we're discussing some bill relating to Affordable Care Act or health care. It's simply not true that this House is working on health care. The Affordable Care Act is being implemented. It wasn't repealed. I know there was a candidate that ran for president against Mr. Obama that wanted to repeal it. Had he been elected, it still would have had to pass these chambers. It didn't happen. Elections happen. The health care reform are being implemented. I just met with some of the folks from the exchanges in my state of Colorado, my office earlier this morning here. I realize the House of Representatives has voted 41 times to repeal Obamacare. It's just talk. The shopping period in the exchanges begins on October 1st. Coloradans, like many across the country, are rolling up their sleeves, going to work, figuring out what the Affordable Care Act means. We even had bipartisan support in my state for our law that created the exchange as well. When Connect for Colorado goes online next month, more than 817,000 Coloradans will have access to choosing a health care insurance product through the exchange, more than 80,000 people in my district. Again, these things are just happening. I mean, this is information I'm sharing here with the public. This has nothing to do, these bills that we're talking about, 40 repeals of Obamacare, this redundant bill here today where they like or don't like what the president's doing, they want to do it themselves, they like what President Obama is doing so much. I mean, these things are nothing. These things aren't going to the Senate. These things aren't being signed. They are absolutely symbolic and a complete waste of time, while this body hasn't spent 1 minute on the floor in consideration of an immigration reform bill. Not 1 minute, which is why I'm taking this time instead of talking about nothing, 41 repeals of Affordable Care Act when it ain't going to happen because elections matter and have consequences. Nothing. Not 1 minute on something big. Securing our border, restoring the rule of law, reducing our deficit, shoring up Social Security, improving our national security, making sure that our system is aligned with our values. These are big deals. Not 1 minute. Not 1 minute. A lot of time on nothing. That's what we're doing today. It's what we did yesterday. I sure hope it's not what we're doing tomorrow, but sadly, I'm not optimistic. We need to act, Mr. Speaker, on so many pressing national issues. Surely we can spare 1 minute or 10 minutes or 15 minutes to discuss and pass the Senate immigration reform bill instead of this nothing going nowhere, just like yesterday, just like tomorrow. We can do better, Mr. Speaker. This nation deserves an institution in the House of Representatives that serves the people of this country. It serves the people in addressing real issues that they face. People that are tired of the undermining of our law by people working illegally. People that are tired of families being torn apart. People that are tired of 1,000 people a day illegally crossing our southern border. Today, yes, and tomorrow, because of the refusal of this body to allow even 1 minute to discuss or debate a bill on immigration reform. I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman from Colorado reserves. The gentleman from Texas is recognized.
I would remind everyone in the House chamber that 7 times the House has voted to restrict, delay, defund a portion of the Affordable Care Act. 7 times those have passed into law if it's signed by the President. This is an important effort. This was a massive overtaking of the country's health care system that was passed in not a bipartisan fashion, but a single-party vote, March of 2010. The President has decided now, even with his own law, he got everything he wanted in the law, he's going to selectively enforce. If we're going to talk about the rule of law, let's talk about the rule of law. The bill before us today is a good rule. It assures that those taxpayer subsidies are going to the individuals who are deserving of those subsidies, and they, for crying out loud, let's stop paying the crooks. I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman from Texas reserves. The gentleman from Colorado. is
Let me
recognized.
inquire if the gentleman has any remaining speakers.
The gentleman from Texas has unlimited speakers in himself, but beyond me, no.
Okay, the hordes of people coming to speak on this bill were not apparent to me here, but I'm prepared to close, Mr. Speaker, seeing no speakers, and I yield myself the balance of my time.
The gentleman is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I mean, despite spending hours and days of debate here on Affordable Care Act, repealing it, defunding it, it's being implemented. That's happening. Elections have consequences. As the Speaker of this esteemed body himself has said, it's paraphrase. It's unlikely that we will repeal Obamacare with a fellow named Obama in the White House. That's simply a truism. Yet here we are today discussing something that will go nowhere and does nothing, instead of something that will go somewhere and does something. This bill before us fails to replace our broken immigration system with one that works. If this bill before us today passes, I guarantee you that 1,000 people will continue to cross illegally into the country tomorrow, the next day, and the next day. This bill does not secure our border at all. This bill does not reduce our deficit by over $100 billion. This bill does not reflect our values in our immigration system. This bill does not allow us to look in the mirror at night knowing that we are a nation of immigrants and a nation of laws, and we must reconcile those two. The Senate passed a bipartisan comprehensive immigration bill last June. A bill that holds true to these principles of fiscal responsibility, reducing our deficit, shoring up Social Security, the principle of national security, of finally getting serious about securing our southern border, implementing mandatory workplace authentication to ensure that employers are following the law, the principle of job creation and competitiveness, a system that will make sure that the great companies of tomorrow are based here, and that we have access to the talent we need to be great and grow our economy as a country. The Senate Comprehensive Immigration Reform Bill would grow our GDP by over 3.3%. This bill will not. This bill will not. And finally, this bill does nothing to address the concerns that have been raised by the Catholic Conference of Bishops, by the Evangelical Immigration Round Table, by faith-based groups in a broad coalition across this country, and by those who value our traditions and our values as Americans. This bill does nothing to reconcile our immigration system with our values. And the Senate immigration bill does. We can take it up now. We can pass it now. The President has expressed a willingness to sign it now. And I encourage my colleagues to vote no and defeat the previous question, to vote no on this restrictive rule and unnecessary bill, so that finally we can bring forward the Senate Immigration Reform Bill, pass it, and send it to the President of the United States to get serious about addressing problems the American people, by an overwhelming majority, actually want us to solve. The Senate bipartisan bill would bring people like Javier out of the shadows, reunite Gabriela and her sister with her parents, and provide them with an accelerated 5-year path to earn permanent residence, so that they can contribute to make our country even greater. Mr. Speaker, today's debate isn't really about the Affordable Care Act or even health care in general. What's happening is happening. Some people like it, some people don't. It's happening. This debate is purely politics. I ask my friends on the other side of the aisle, why are we not focused on replacing our broken immigration system with one that works? If my colleagues on the other side of the aisle join me on voting no, defeating this rule, and defeating the previous question, perhaps we can finally get to work on the people's business here in the House of Representatives. And finally, fix our broken immigration system and replace it with one that works for our prosperity, our security, and for job creation for Americans. I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman from Colorado yields back. The gentleman from Texas is recognized.
And Mr. Speaker, again, let me remind you why we are here today. We are here today because the President, who signed the Patient Protection Affordable Care Act into law March of 2010, on July 2nd of this year, decided he was not going to enforce a portion of the law unilaterally. The President made the decision, didn't consult with Congress, put it out in a blog post on one of their White House websites on July the 2nd. Then 3 days later, the Friday before the 4th of July weekend, they came out with a raft of regulations, and buried within that raft of regulations was the fact that, oh, by the way, we're not checking anybody who comes in. It will rely on self-attestation. They were required to do that because by not enforcing the employer mandate that was in their law that they signed, by not enforcing the employer mandate, the data would not be collected, and in fact there was no way to enforce that data. So we simply don't need the data. We'll trust people are going to be honest. If they come in and say they need a subsidy, of course they need a subsidy. We'll give it to them. And yeah, at some point it might even be checked against their IRS records. How are you going to claw that back from someone who doesn't have the money anymore? Because after all, the dollars in the subsidy don't go to the individual, they go to the insurance company. It's not like that individual went and deposited that in a bank account. It went to their insurance company to buy their health insurance. The money's been spent, the policy has been utilized or not, but that water is under the bridge. I didn't ask for this debate. I didn't ask for the President to sign the health care bill into law, but he did. But then I sure didn't ask him to just delay parts of it. If anything is inconvenient to you, Mr. President, just kind of put it away, put it to the side. All kinds of things have fallen off the Affordable Care Act as it's bucked and burped down the road towards implementation. You may remember the debate about pre-existing conditions. What about the federal pre-existing condition program? Anyone who showed up after February 1st of this year to be covered under the federal pre-existing condition program was told, sorry, the window is closed, we're not signing up any more individuals because we're out of money. So they had to wait 11 months until the Elysian fields of the Affordable Care Act spread out before them. But what are they to do for that 11 months? If they've got a diagnosis which is incompatible with life unless they get treatment, but the administration didn't care about that. They simply suspended enrollment in the pre-existing condition program. Well, what about the caps on out-of-pocket expenses that an individual could incur during a year? Under the Affordable Care Act, there were caps signed into law by the President. The caps were excluded because it's kind of inconvenient and we don't want to do that anymore. The small business health exchanges delayed for a year. What else is going to fall off this thing as it lurches towards implementation on January 1st? I don't know. But I do know this. We have an opportunity today to vote on a rule that allows a bill to come to the floor that will require that the Department of Health and Human Services, the Inspector General, assure that those individuals who come and say, hey, I'm eligible for a subsidy, to ensure that they are in fact eligible for that subsidy. We fight all the time in committee with money going out the door at the Department of Health and Human Services, the pay and chase model. It clearly doesn't work. Medicare and Medicaid, inappropriate payments, inefficient expenditures happen all the time. Let's not make that worse. Let's stop paying the crooks. We have an opportunity today to stop paying the crooks. Mr. Speaker, today's rule provides for the consideration of a critical bill to protect taxpayer dollars from the rampant fraud inevitable in an undertaking as massive as the health insurance overhaul that is known as Obamacare. I congratulate my colleague from Tennessee, Ms. Black, for her thoughtful piece of legislation, and for that reason, I'll yield back the balance of my time, move the previous question, encourage my colleagues to vote yes on the rule and yes on the underlying bill.
The gentleman from Texas yields back. The question is on ordering the previous question of the resolution. Those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it.
Mr. Speaker,
Gentleman from Texas.
may I ask for the yeas and nays on that vote?
The yeas and nays are requested. Those favoring a vote by the yeas and nays will rise. Sufficient number having arisen pursuant to Clause 8 of Rule 20, further proceedings on this question will be postponed. On this vote, the ayes are 227, the noes are 196. The previous question is ordered. The question is on adoption of the resolution. Those in favor will say aye. Those opposed will say no. The ayes have it. The resolution is adopted. Gentleman from Colorado.
On that, I request the yeas and the nays.
The yeas and nays are requested. Those favoring a vote by the yeas and nays will rise. A sufficient number having risen, the yeas and nays are ordered. Members will record their votes by electronic device. This will be a 5-minute vote. On this vote, the yeas are 228, the nays are 195. The resolution is agreed to. Without objection, motion to lay on the table. Considers laid on the table.